So one of the more interesting award races this year to me has been Defensive Player of the Year, because I really feel like there are two super strong candidates and they have super strong cases, and I kind of go back and forth as to who I believe should win it. Now, I do have a favorite between the two, but I completely understand why you would be on the side of the other player here. And of course, if you've seen the thumbnail and you just know what the DPOY race is, it's pretty much between Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brook Lopez. Now, Evan Mobley has made a really strong push for it over the last few months because he's really ramped up his game just in general after seeming like he was having a little bit of a sophomore slump, which of course meant still being one of the best defenders in the NBA and getting like 15 and 8 every night. But he's been a lot better lately, and he's kind of put his name into the conversation to a degree, but ultimately I'm pretty confident that Brook Lopez or Jaren Jackson Jr. will be holding up the DPOY award when that time comes. So given that, let's talk about both of these guys' cases and ultimately why I think one of them should win it. But again, really close race. So let's talk about Jaren first. If we're just talking about pure counting stats, Jaren probably wins this conversation versus everybody else because he's averaging like 3.5 blocks a game. He is definitely more a visually impressive defensive player than Brook Lopez. Like, if we want to talk about who has more entertaining defensive highlights, it's probably Jaren, because Jaren is running back and forth up the court constantly, getting crazy, athletic as hell, really well timed, very visually fun to watch blocks. Whereas Brook Lopez's approach to defense is more slow, methodical, and just like, yeah, I'm really big, and there's just nothing you're gonna do that's gonna eclipse the fact that I'm just taking up all the space here. Also racking up block numbers quite a bit himself, but more so a slower approach and a more not necessarily like jumping out in the stat sheet. Brook Lopez for the Milwaukee Bucks defense essentially functions in drop coverage. I said I was going to start with Jaren, but I guess I'm just going both at the same time here. Functions primarily in drop coverage. He is defending the pick and roll and drop, and does a very good job, again, given his size, of being able to make it to where you can't really confidently do anything in the pick and roll. Even if you're like giving up space for the mid-range shot per se, Brook still has enough length and covers enough ground that he can get a contest on that, and also has a good way of like just kind of putting his hand in the area where you would want to go for like a mid-range pull-up, was just enough to make you second guess it. And then of course he is good enough at recovering back to the big man, or like being right there to just put his hands up. He kind of represents some of the verticality that like Roy Hibbert would do back in the day, but you know, not to the same degree obviously, because that doesn't work as effectively as it did back in the day. But yeah, Brook Lopez is just kind of always there and always in the way and always a huge body, and again, still racks up, I believe he's averaging over 2 blocks a game. Jaren Jackson, meanwhile, it's ironically almost like Jaren has more of the Giannis role defensively, where he's able to free roam a little bit more. While he is obviously a rim protector, it's not like what he's kind of limited to. Like, Jaren still does a lot of defensive stuff on the perimeter. Meanwhile, Brook Lopez really not so much. Again, as I mentioned, his defense in the pick and roll is very noteworthy and very impactful. But like, if one of them gets switched onto a guard, I trust Jaren to handle that significantly more than I trust Brook Lopez, because he is a lot more agile. Now, the symbiotic relationship that Brook Lopez and Giannis has defensively is probably the biggest argument you would use against him in this race, in that he kind of has the luxury of not having to do that more free roaming type of thing because he has Giannis on his team. Meanwhile, Jaren actually takes on that role a little bit more. And me personally, I've always felt as though the Giannis, like, people always say free safety. I don't know shit about football, so if that's the wrong terminology, my bad, but like, just someone who's kind of allowed to not necessarily focus all the time on their one-on-one matchup, but rather roam around the court, be able to bring help defense, weak side shot blocking, things like that. I value that role a little bit more, but it's also impossible to watch the Milwaukee Bucks and not see how what Brook Lopez does contributes to a stop so comically consistently. Whereas if we look at Memphis, they're both top defenses and all that, but I feel like there are more holes in that defense. And again, that's in part because Jaren doesn't have a Giannis level defender next to him. He has Steven Adams or Brandon Clark, who are ironically capable of doing a more Brook Lopez type thing. Steven more than Clark, because Clark is also someone who's very versatile. Overall, Jaren has less help defensively, less of a luxury. So there are more holes in that defense. There are more ways to score on them. And the Milwaukee Bucks paint is more threatening than Memphis's paint, even if, again, Jaren's averaging damn near 4 blocks. So the argument would be the Bucks, for Brook, the Bucks are better defensively. I would argue Brook is a little bit more consistently just getting stops defensively, even though the difference is negligible. But he also has Drew Holiday defending the perimeter and Giannis on the weak side in case he does fuck up, and that's pretty helpful. Meanwhile, on the side of Memphis, Dillon Brooks is a good defender, as much as it begrudges me to say it, but that's really about it. And the fouls that he commits actually put Jaren at a disadvantage frequently, because Dillon will put the team in the bonus, and then now Jaren has to be more careful in regards to his fouling when he's trying to be a rim protector, and we know Jaren's had that problem in the past. So Jaren's at a little bit more of a disadvantage from a team construction standpoint, but at the same time, he's also more built to deal with that disadvantage given his versatility. Like, if you're going to be the sole defender on a team of not that many great defenders, you want to be able to defend in multiple different ways, and Jaren can do that. Meanwhile, Brook Lopez has the luxury of having a very specialized set of circumstances defensively, and also has Giannis and Drew Holiday to back him up. So that really comes down to the argument of, like, let's say you put both of these players as just like the starting big on a team of a bunch of like C- defenders. Which defense ultimately ends up being better? It's kind of the same argument you use in the MVP about help and all that, like take one player away, which team's worse? I think it's pretty obvious that the Milwaukee Bucks are a better defensive team without Brook Lopez than the Memphis Grizzlies are without Jaren Jackson Jr. All of that stuff said, though, you can't deny how impactful that highly specialized role is. And if we're just talking about being purely the most impactful individual defender and the one who most consistently is the reason that a offensive possession goes poorly for their opponent, I think the answer is Brook Lopez. So that's why, me personally, I'm going with Brook Lopez in this debate. That said, if you have Jaren winning this one, I completely understand that. Won't fight you on that. I think that's an entirely fair point. But yeah, it's really between these two, and I'm going to go with Brook. And I'm just glad that the DPOY race this year actually has something of substance to it. In fact, I think this is one of the better DPOY races, really, since it was like Anthony Davis and Giannis in 2020. But last year's Defensive Player of the Year race, man, I feel like no one thought about it all year, and they were like, I don't know, Marcus Smart, I guess. And that's just kind of how it happened. And I did not love that. Did not love the candidates last year. Didn't feel like it was really accurate. Feel like Giannis should have been mentioned again. I feel like he honestly deserves more mention in this one even. But I can also watch the Bucks and can't deny that Brook has been their most impactful defender. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the DPOY race. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video and tolerating a video that says that Jaren shouldn't win DPOY, or maybe he just edited me to be looking goofy this whole time because he's a Grizzlies fan and I'm saying Brook Lopez should win DPOY. Whatever. Anyways, bye.